It's August 9th, 1942, 2 a.m. Somewhere in the darkness of Iron Bottom Sound, 4 Allied heavy cruisers are burning. USS Astoria, USS Quincy, USS Vincennes, HMS Canberra, all hit by Japanese torpedoes and shells in the span of 32 minutes. Over 1,000 sailors are dead or dying in oil-slicked water. And on the beach at Guadalcanal, 11,000 United States Marines are watching the horizon light up with explosions. They landed 36 hours ago. Now they're about to be abandoned. Major General Alexander Vandegrift, commander of the 1st Marine Division, gets the news at dawn. Vice Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher is pulling his aircraft carriers out. The transports carrying half their supplies, ammunition, and heavy equipment are leaving with him. Vandegrift's Marines have 4 days of ammunition, 17 days of food, no naval support, no air cover. And somewhere in the jungle behind them, Japanese forces are already massing for a counterattack. The first American ground offensive of World War II has just become a survival mission. 2 days earlier, August 7th, Operation Watchtower had started with promise. The 1st Marine Division hit the beaches of Guadalcanal at 9:10 a.m., tasked with capturing a half-finished Japanese airfield on the northern coast. Intelligence estimated 5,000 Japanese troops on the island. The actual number was closer to 2,200, mostly construction workers from the 11th and 13th construction units, with roughly 430 naval infantry for security. The Japanese ran. By August 8th, the Marines had seized the airfield, capturing stockpiles of rice, construction equipment, and 2 radar sets. Engineers renamed it Henderson Field, after Major Lofton Henderson, a Marine aviator killed at Midway. The operation looked like a textbook success. Then came the Battle of Savo Island. A Japanese cruiser force under Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa slipped past American picket destroyers and caught the Allied screening force completely off guard. In one of the worst naval defeats in American history, 4 heavy cruisers went down. The Japanese didn't lose a single ship. Fletcher, already nervous about Japanese air attacks, used the disaster as justification to withdraw his carriers. Rear Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, commanding the amphibious force, had no choice but to follow. Vandegrift watched the transports steam away with half his division's supplies still in their holds. The Marines on Guadalcanal were now alone. They held a 4-mile perimeter around Henderson Field, a rectangle of kunai grass and coconut palms surrounded by jungle so thick you couldn't see 10 feet into it. They had rifles, machine guns, a handful of 75mm artillery pieces, and whatever Japanese rice they could stomach. The nearest friendly base was Espiritu Santo, 550 miles southeast. The Japanese called Guadalcanal the Island of Death. The Marines were about to learn why. Real quick before we dive deeper, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. What city? What state? What country? And what time is it where you are right now? Always cool to see how spread out this audience really is. All right, let's get back into it. The jungle started killing Marines before the Japanese did. Guadalcanal sits 6 degrees south of the equator. Daytime temperatures hit 95 degrees with humidity so thick it felt like breathing through a wet towel. The island's interior was a nightmare of razor-sharp kunai grass, rotting vegetation, and mud that sucked boots off men's feet. And then, there were the diseases. Malaria hit first. The Anopheles mosquito bred in every puddle, every foxhole, every shell crater that filled with rain. Within weeks, over 60% of the 1st Marine Division was running fevers. Atabrine tablets were in short supply. The Navy had sailed away with most of the medical stores. Men shook with chills in 90-degree heat, hallucinated on watch, collapsed on patrol. By October, malaria was putting 5 Marines in the field hospital for every one wounded by enemy fire. Dysentery came next. Contaminated water, spoiled rations, and Japanese rice crawling with weevils tore through digestive systems. Marines lost 15, 20, 30 pounds. They called the Japanese rice maggot rice and ate it anyway because there was nothing else. The food situation was desperate. Vandegrift put his division on 2 meals a day, 1/3 of standard rations. Breakfast was usually a single cup of rice or oatmeal. Dinner was whatever could be scrounged. Marines trapped rats in the coconut groves and roasted them over small fires. They shot feral pigs when they could find them. They ate coconuts until the oil gave them diarrhea that made the dysentery worse. And every night, the Japanese came. August 18th brought the first reinforcements to the enemy garrison. Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki landed 9 to 16 men of his 28th Infantry Regiment on the eastern end of Guadalcanal, transported by destroyer in a tactic the Marines would soon call the Tokyo Express. Ichiki was a veteran of Manchuria, contemptuous of American fighting ability. He didn't wait for the rest of his regiment. He attacked immediately. August 21st, 3:10 a.m. Ichiki's force hit the Marine perimeter at the mouth of Alligator Creek, misidentified on maps as the Tenaru River. They came screaming out of the coconut grove, bayonets fixed, expecting the Americans to break and run. The Marines didn't run. Lieutenant Colonel Edwin Pollock's 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, had dug in behind the sandbar at the creek mouth. They'd positioned machine guns with interlocking fields of fire. When Ichiki's men charged across the sandbar, they ran straight into a wall of 30 caliber rounds. Bodies piled up on the sand. Japanese soldiers kept coming, climbing over their dead, and the Marines kept shooting. By dawn, Ichiki had lost over 800 men. The Marines counted 777 Japanese bodies on the sandbar and in the creek. 35 were taken prisoner. Ichiki burned his regimental colors and shot himself. Marine casualties, 44 dead, 71 wounded. It was a lopsided victory. It was also a warning. The Japanese weren't going to stop. They were going to keep coming, in larger numbers with heavier weapons, until they retook that airfield or died trying. The Tokyo Express ran almost every night. Japanese destroyers would race down the Slot, the channel between the Solomon Islands, unload troops and supplies after dark, and disappear before American aircraft could catch them at dawn. By mid-September, there were over 6,000 Japanese soldiers on Guadalcanal. By October, there would be 20,000. The Marines needed air power, and they needed it now. August 20th, 1942. 12 days after the Navy abandoned them, the Marines on Guadalcanal heard the sound of salvation. Aircraft engines. 2 squadrons dropped out of the clouds and lined up on Henderson Field's 3,800-foot runway. 19 Grumman F-4F Wildcat fighters from VMF 223. 12 Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers from VMSB 232. The pilots had launched from the escort carrier USS Long Island, 200 miles southeast. They touched down on a strip of packed dirt, crushed coral, and bomb craters that the Marines had been filling by hand for 2 weeks. The Cactus Air Force was born. Cactus was the Allied code name for Guadalcanal. It wasn't much. The Wildcats were slower than Japanese Zeros, less maneuverable, and couldn't climb as fast. The Dauntlesses were dive bombers pressed into service as makeshift ground attack aircraft. Fuel came from captured Japanese supplies, and whatever the Navy could sneak in by transport. Spare parts were non-existent. Mechanics cannibalized wrecked planes to keep others flying. But now the Tokyo Express had a problem. Japanese destroyers couldn't unload troops in daylight anymore. American dive bombers would find them and put 500-pound bombs through their decks. The Japanese shifted to night operations only, which limited how much they could deliver. More importantly, Henderson Field meant American fighters could intercept Japanese bomber raids before they hit the Marine perimeter. The air battles over Guadalcanal became a daily meat grinder. Japanese bombers flew down from Rabaul, 650 miles northwest, escorted by Zeros. Marine pilots scrambled to meet them, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day. Captain John L. Smith of VMF 223 shot down 19 Japanese aircraft in 30 days. Captain Marion Carl got 18. They flew until their aircraft were held together with wire and prayer. The Japanese decided Henderson Field had to be destroyed on the ground. That meant a major offensive. September 12, 1942. Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi assembled 6,000 troops of his 35th Infantry Brigade in the jungle south of the airfield. His plan? A night assault through the jungle, overwhelming the thin Marine lines on a grassy ridge 1,000 yards from the runway. Take the ridge, take the airfield, push the Americans into the sea. The ridge was defended by 840 men under Lieutenant Colonel Merritt, Red Mike Edson, a mix of Marine raiders and paramarines. Edson had guessed the Japanese would hit his position. He'd spent 2 days preparing fields of fire and registering artillery coordinates. When his men asked why they were digging in on that particular ridge, Edson told them, "This is where they're coming." He was right. The Japanese hit at 9 p.m. Waves of infantry came out of the jungle screaming. The fighting was so close that Marines threw grenades into enemy soldiers 10 feet away. The line bent. Edson pulled back to a second position, 200 yards from Henderson Field's fighter strip. Kawaguchi threw everything he had at the shrinking perimeter. Edson held. His men fired until their rifle barrels burned their hands. Artillery from the 11th Marines dropped shells so close that shrapnel hit both sides. By dawn, on September 14th, over 800 Japanese bodies lay on the slopes of what would forever be called Bloody Ridge, or Edson's Ridge. Marine casualties, 104 killed, 278 wounded. Edson received the Medal of Honor. More importantly, Henderson Field was still operational. The Japanese weren't done. They were sending an army. By mid-October 1942, the Japanese had assembled their largest ground force of the Pacific War on Guadalcanal. Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake, commanding the 17th Army, had 20,000 troops ready to crush the Marine perimeter. This time there would be no piecemeal attacks. This time they would hit Henderson Field from 3 directions simultaneously. The Marines had 23,000 men by now, the 1st Marine Division reinforced by the 7th Marine Regiment, which had arrived in September. But over a third were sick with malaria. Ammunition was rationed. The perimeter stretched 7 miles, far too long for the forces available. Vandegrift knew an attack was coming. He didn't know how big. October 23, 1942. Hyakutake launched his offensive. The main assault came from the south, where Major General Yumio Nasu's 2nd Sendai Division, 9,000 men, was supposed to smash through Marine lines on a series of ridges near the Guadalcanal River. A secondary attack from the east would pin down American reserves. Japanese naval forces would bombard Henderson Field and land fresh troops once the airfield fell. The plan fell apart in the jungle. Japanese units got lost in the dense vegetation. Regiments arrived at their attack positions hours late. The coordinated 3-pronged assault turned into a series of unconnected charges spread over 3 nights, and the Marines were waiting. Lieutenant Colonel Louis Chesty Puller commanded the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines on the southern perimeter. His 700 men held a mile-long front. On the night of October 24th, the Sendai Division hit his lines in wave after wave of bayonet charges. Japanese soldiers cut through the barbed wire. They overran forward positions. They got so close to Henderson Field that artillery shells were landing on the runway. Puller called in artillery on his own positions. He walked the lines under fire, shoving men into gaps, screaming orders over the sound of grenades and machine guns. At one point, a Japanese officer broke through and swung a samurai sword at Sergeant John Bassilone's machine gun crew. Bassilone's men killed him and kept firing. Bassilone's 2 machine gun sections held a critical sector for 2 days. When ammunition ran low, he sprinted 200 yards through enemy fire to resupply his guns. When one gun jammed, he cleared it with his bare hands, while Japanese infantry closed to grenade range. He was later awarded the Medal of Honor, the first enlisted Marine in World War II to receive it. By October 26th, the Japanese offensive was broken. Over 3,500 Japanese soldiers lay dead around the Marine perimeter. Nasu himself was killed leading a final charge. American casualties? 300. But the crisis wasn't over. The Japanese Navy was still fighting for control of the waters around Guadalcanal. Between October 26th and November 15th, a series of brutal naval battles erupted north of the island. The Naval Battle of Guadalcanal, November 13th and 15th, was the decisive clash. Two American rear admirals, Daniel Callahan and Norman Scott, were killed in a close-range night action that Navy historians called a barroom brawl with battleships. The Americans lost 2 cruisers and 7 destroyers. The Japanese lost 2 battleships, a cruiser, 3 destroyers, and 11 transport ships carrying 10,000 reinforcements. Those reinforcements never landed. After mid-November, the Tokyo Express slowed to a trickle. The Japanese couldn't replace their losses. The Marines could. The siege was lifting. December 9th, 1942. The first elements of the 1st Marine Division boarded transports at Lunga Point, bound for Australia. They had been on Guadalcanal for 4 months. They looked like ghosts. The men who shuffled up the gangplanks had lost an average of 20 pounds each. Their uniforms hung off skeletal frames. Over 2/3 carried malaria parasites in their blood. Many would suffer recurring fevers for years. Their eyes had a 1,000-yard stare that medical officers were just beginning to document. These were the survivors. The Army's Americal Division and 25th Infantry Division took over the perimeter. Fresh troops, full rations, new equipment. The campaign wasn't over, but the 1st Marine Division's part in it was. The Japanese held on until February. Imperial General Headquarters had finally accepted what field commanders had known for weeks. Guadalcanal couldn't be held. Operation KE, the evacuation, began on February 1st, 1943. Japanese destroyers ran down the slot 3 times over 7 nights, pulling 10,652 soldiers off the island under cover of darkness. American forces didn't realize it was an evacuation until it was over. They'd expected another offensive. On February 9th, 1943, Major General Alexander Patch, commanding the Army forces on Guadalcanal, sent a message to Admiral William Halsey. Tokyo Express no longer has terminus on Guadalcanal. The campaign was over. It had lasted exactly 6 months. The cost was staggering. The 1st Marine Division suffered 1,042 killed in action and over 2,800 wounded. But combat casualties told only part of the story. Malaria, dysentery, and tropical diseases hospitalized thousands more. The division's grueling term estimated total casualties, including sick and wounded, at nearly 7,000 men. The Japanese lost approximately $31,000, $20,000 on the island itself, another $4,000 in naval battles, and thousands more drowned when their transports were sunk. The naval losses were equally brutal. The waters north of Guadalcanal earned their nickname, Iron Bottom Sound, from the dozens of warships resting on the seafloor. The Americans lost 29 ships, including 2 fleet carriers. The Japanese lost 38, including 2 battleships. Both navies were exhausted. But the strategic calculus had shifted permanently. Guadalcanal was the first time in the Pacific War that American forces had taken ground from Japan and held it. The first time Japanese soldiers had been forced to retreat. The first crack in the myth of Japanese invincibility that had dominated the Pacific since Pearl Harbor. Before Guadalcanal, the Japanese advanced and the Allies retreated. After Guadalcanal, it was the other way around. The campaign proved that American infantry could beat Japanese infantry in jungle warfare, man for man, rifle for rifle. It proved that Henderson Field's model worked. Seize an airstrip, hold it, use land-based air power to control the surrounding waters. The island-hopping strategy that would carry American forces to Tokyo's doorstep was validated in the mud and blood of Guadalcanal. The 1st Marine Division spent months recovering in Australia. They'd land again at Cape Gloucester, Peleliu, Okinawa, some of the hardest fighting of the Pacific War. But Guadalcanal made them. It forged an identity that exists to this day. In 1943, the division received the Presidential Unit Citation, the first awarded in World War II. The citation mentioned the Icarus climate, the tumultuous, impassable terrain, and the enemy. Veterans would say the order was wrong. The terrain and climate were worse than the Japanese. They held an airstrip in the jungle for 6 months. They ate rats. They shook with malaria. They buried their friends in shallow graves, marked with rifles and helmets. And they won the first American offensive victory of the Pacific War. Guadalcanal proved something the Japanese High Command never wanted to admit. America wasn't going to quit.